Welcome to another episode of the Paradigm 132 podcast, and I am your humble and gracious host, Rashad Horn. And on today's episode, we're going to be reviewing this book right here, Candace Owens' Blackout. Now, if you don't know who Candace Owens is, she's a political activist. She's a staunch supporter of the Republican Party. There are other colorful adjectives that people use and they attach to her. I'm not going to use them today in reference to her because I actually thought that this book was pretty good. I really did. If you've been listening to my last couple of podcasts, and if you haven't, I encourage you to please go back and listen to them. I've set out to read literature, find out information from individuals who I don't wholeheartedly agree with their ideology, in the hopes of figuring out what actually overlaps. And when I figure out what overlaps, which I've found out a lot of things that overlap, it will give me the answers to questions that I still have, right? As far as formulating particular different solutions. So, I read this book in about 2 days. It wasn't a very long read, well, at least to me. I'm always happy to read a book where the font is a pretty good size. I hate reading books that are in small font. That's why I really don't like ordering books, and I haven't been able to like flip through the pages to actually see the font size of it. Because small font, it takes longer to read, and you can bore easily. I like reading, but if the font is too small, I just get bored, so medium to large font books for me, right? So, anyway, this particular book, again, like I said, it was an interesting read. One of the things that stood out to me was if someone asked me to summarize this book without telling what the book is about in its entirety, I would just say this is an open letter to Black America about their relationship with the Democratic Party. If I just had to summarize the book, if someone asked me what the book was about or what it was, that's what I would say. It's an open letter to the African American community about our relationship with the Democratic Party. That's what it's about, right? So, the foreword of this book is written by Larry Elder, which is another individual who they have colorful adjectives to describe him as well. If you don't know Larry Elder is a radio personality. He's a lawyer. He recently unsuccessfully ran in a recall election against Governor Gavin Newsom in the state of California. If you didn't know about that, or if you like the jokes and stuff, he was he was hit by an egg as he was out campaigning one day, right? So that's a brief overview of him, right? I've taken time to listen to a little bit of his backstory in some interviews that he's done. So he seems to be an okay person. Again, those particular ideologies that I don't wholeheartedly agree with. The example that I come up with is I look at it like makeup, right? If you see a person coming down the street with purple makeup on, with purple lipstick on, you'll probably look at it and you may feel like if purple is not your favorite color, you may have something disparaging to say about it, right? But if you don't take time out to really find out who that particular person is and you just base your judgment off of the purple lipstick, then I think you'll miss a lot. And that's the way I look at individuals like Candace Owens and Larry Owens. I'm not Larry Owens. Larry Elder. They have on the purple lipstick. And I can sit there and I can poke fun at you with the things that you say, but no, let me see what makes you tick, right? And that's what I've done, right? So, I'm going to start off this review by some of the things that I'm not going to say I didn't like. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say some things that I question, right? Because again, like I said, I don't agree wholeheartedly with their particular ideology, so I have questions about things. So the first question came relatively early in the foreword, where Larry Elder essentially talked about the status of reparations. And let me preface by saying that this book was written prior to the 2020 presidential election, right? So Larry Elder, talked about, and I'm paraphrasing, how in the lead up to this was that the Democrats were going to take reparations seriously. They were going to summons a commission, the HR 40 situation, to discuss reparations, how much, what does it need to be in, and all that good stuff like that, all the stuff that make you feel good about yourself, right? And the one thing that I questioned was his interpretation of how it would be, well, who would be on the hook for it, right? People have different interpretations of this thing, right? My interpretation would be it would just come from the federal government because the federal government is the one that, hell or high water, has benefited the most from this. No business. I mean, businesses benefited from it, but at the end of the day, the businesses were able to thrive in this particular economy, and no one person is stronger or more powerful than the U.S. government. And when you think you are, they will show you that you're not, right? So he basically said, which is an interesting talking point, is that you're going to be taking money away from people who were not slave owners and giving it to people who were never slaves. And on the surface, again, that's an interesting statement. It makes you stop and think, well, like, yeah, why would a person that wasn't a slave owner, a person that may not know about the extent of slavery, why should I be on the hook for that? If I don't, and even more so, why should my tax money go towards that, right? Because that's where the money would come from. But my rebuttal would be, since 2008, when you had the major financial crisis, Ben Bernanke, who was the Fed chair at the time, embarked on a thing that had never been done before called quantitative easing, in which the Federal Reserve printed money and purchased bonds to reliquify the market, to bolster the economy, lower interest rates to 0%, real interest rates to 0%. So banks could lend money to other banks, large banks could lend money to smaller banks, banks could lend money to people, start businesses, buy cars, finance homes, and all these particular things to get the economy going, because this economy is 70% consumerism, right? So again, going back to my rebuttal, is you don't have to take anything from anybody. Light up the printing press, print the money out, and do what you got to do, right? I think they printed out to the tune of $1.7 trillion during that particular period. And here recently, because I'm recording this November 30th, 2021, they've been buying bonds here since the COVID outbreak. So they can find money because they create money. So that's one of the things that I didn't agree with. But again, hey, it is what it is. That's the pink lipstick right there. I meant the purple lipstick. So moving on. So Candace starts off talking a little bit about her background, living in a roach infested apartment, then moving to go stay with her grandparents, because I believe she stated her grandparents lived in a nicer area where she had access to go to a better school, which is one of the interesting points that she talked about later in this particular book that I've been paying a lot more attention to, and I've taken my experiences and I've tried to insert them within this particular context to give myself a more realistic example of using, or because if you have an example from a personal standpoint about something, it makes the story more relatable to you, and you can really start digging in and finding instances and say, oh, okay, well, this should have been that and that should have been that, right? So that's that. So she goes to talk about her hate crime incident, right? She talked about it because one of the things that she wanted to make note is that I guess there had been a misrepresentation of it where it made it seem like she was crime victim, and she quantified the story. Again, this is her side of the story. I wasn't I wasn't so overly concerned with the story to actually go back and look at it. I'm just taking it from a first hand account, right? I'm taking it from a first hand account. So she talks about how she had a friend and she ended up getting a boyfriend. And so when she got the boyfriend, her and that particular friend, they didn't hang out anymore. So one night she was at her boyfriend's house and she stated that her phone didn't have good service at her boyfriend's house. They were sitting around, watching TV, all this stuff. And strange numbers kept calling her phone, leaving voicemails because she couldn't answer the phone because she didn't have service. So she said once she got out of the house, she went back, listened to the voicemails and all this stuff, and it was the friend that she was no longer hanging out with, saying all type of disparaging things, N word, made reference to Martin Luther King being assassinated and all this stuff like this, right? So the next day, I believe she stated they went to class, one of the classes, and they had almost like an intervention where like it was like an open floor where people could just talk about stuff. So she talked about it. And at first, it was a scenario where they were trying to say the story was made up, right? The story was made up because the person that was being implicated was the mayor's son, right? So obviously, you can imagine how something like that could just mess anything up. If you're the mayor of a town and it comes out that your child is racist, then they're gonna go back and look at the tree that bears the fruit and say, well, my goodness, if your child is like this, then we know you're like that, right? So she said the NAACP came, they made a big scene about it and things like this, and so as it began to gain more steam, it came out like, well, she didn't make the story up. The story is valid, validity and things like that. And she said the more it went on, because she said it was a 6-week investigation by the FBI. And she talked about the longer it went on, the more it seemed that the NAACP was not concerned about her well-being. It was more concerned about bringing, or as she may have put it, ruining um, a childhood friend of hers. Now, she said that what happened was wrong, right? It was wrong. But at the same time, feeling like they were young, that particular thing shouldn't be held over their head, and it's gonna follow you around because it wasn't just him; it was him and a couple more friends. Now, one of the things that she stated that the person did it because they sat there and they thought about what can I do or what can I say to hurt her the way that she hurt me. Her words. And that's what they came up with, right? They were 14 years old, so that's what they came up with. To start saying disparaging racial things and all, racial epithets and stuff like that. So, you know me. I put myself in those particular shoes. I said, wait a minute, if I had some white friends and a situation occurred like that, would I have the same discretion to say, well, hey, you're just young, you were upset, you don't know how to handle that? And I thought to myself, I said, no, I don't think I can let you off the hook like that. All right. Can I say that you are a racist, a bigot, or prejudice, or whatever? I can because you gave me evidence to do that. One of the things that we always heard, and well, let me speak for myself. One of the things I always heard is three people that'll tell you the truth: a child, a person is angry, and a person is drunk. And so, going by her recollection of her first-hand account of the story, all three of those things are going on here. They were children, they were mad, and they were drunk. So all these three things are at play here. So you're three for three. So I feel like maybe you may not be to the point that y'all would drag someone behind a truck or run into someone's house or whatever like that. But I do feel like that you have that inside of you. But that's just me, right? That's just me. So that's the that's the end of that particular story. Basically, by and large, one of the things that I've noticed about a few of these people that I've followed recently is that they started off with liberal ideologies, liberal standpoints, because one of the things is kind of like I, I I I likened it to a region in which you're born in and whatever is the predominant religion in that particular region. So if you're in one part of the U.S., you may be Mormon. If you're in southeast Mississippi, which is considered the Bible Belt, you'll probably be Christian. If you're more up north, you may have more Muslim or Catholic faith or whatever like that. So I liken political affiliations in the same particular realm. In the black community, it has been drilled into us that a lot of the things that are plaguing us today are because of white Republicans. Not white Democrats, but white Republicans. So you should give your vote, which they say is so very important, to the Democrats because we're going to make sure that the programs that we have going are going to make sure that you're taken care of, right? So that's what we have going on there. And again, this is her open letter to say, hey, we need to reevaluate some things. When you pull out the checkbook or the progress meter, we'll look and see that technically we are not any further moved ahead than we were back then as a whole, right? Because we can always point at individuals, and a lot of times when we point at individuals, one of the things that we can take away from the individuals is that a lot of times those individuals do not share those same sentiments and the same mindset of the Democrats, right? But they'll come out and say that, hey, you need to be with the Democrats, right? Even though they don't themselves subscribe to a vast majority of the things that they agree with, right? So that's that. So, one of the things that I'm just gonna read, I got a couple things marked off in here that I want to read, and I'm gonna discuss, and then that's gonna be into this. So, one of the other pertinent individuals that I've been listening to along with Dr. Soul, Larry Elder, and Candace Owens is Dr. Walter Williams. Dr. Williams is no longer here with us. He passed away, but I'm happy that YouTube allowed for me to find him, and I've purchased some of his books, so I'm going to be delving into them. He was a black economist at that particular time, right? So this is what he talked about. Because when we look in the middle, one of the things that Candace Owens brings home is the element of the black family and how the destruction of the black family has been the largest hindrance and the easiest way for the Democratic Party to seemingly infiltrate the black community, because you have destroyed the black family and basically a will for it to do better on its own, right? So this is what Walter Williams stated. So in 1940, he said approximately 12% of black children were born out of wedlock. Okay? Fast forward to 1965, Daniel Pectram Moynihan published a report called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action, which I'm going to be doing a podcast about that because I read the paper in its entirety, and I think it's very interesting because I think it ties into a lot of the things that, you know what, you'll hear when I do the podcast, right? So this is what he said. So the percentage of black children entering the world without a father in the house was at 25%. So in 25 years, the percentage went from 12 up to 25. And one of the things that, again, that Candace was hammering home is while the 60s were looked at as a great monumental victory for African Americans, there were things that transpired in the 30s leading up to the 60s and beyond that were also tearing the black family down. And it hit a head, probably I would say in the 80s, right? Some of the things that were already deteriorating, and it hit a head in the 80s because I listened to a multitude of different people, from intellectuals and people that were in illicit activities, and I'm starting to piece a lot of things together with this, right? So, so I'm gonna keep that there. So that was 25%. So the CDC today, which again this book was written prior to the 2020 election, stated that nearly 70% of black children entering into the world today without a father. And Candace was at a congressional hearing on white nationalism, and she said, if we're going to have a hearing on white supremacy, we're assuming that the biggest victims of that are minority Americans. And presumably, this hearing would be to stop that and preserve the lives of minority Americans, which based on the hierarchy of what's impacting minority Americans. She said, if I had to make a list of 100 things, white nationalism would not make the list. So that is her saying that basically this cry for white nationalism, white supremacy, is not as big of an issue as people are making it out to be. And more so, it seems that it's a thing that is just dangled out there for when a person doesn't maybe try as hard as they can to better their particular situation, right? So, and I always find this interesting, man. This is a 1997 poll that she got. This is 1997. I mean, I'm always intrigued when you use old polls because uh, I feel there were different sentiments during certain time periods, right? But it is what it is, right? So that says in a 1997 Time CNN poll asked black and white teens whether racism is a major problem in America. Stated not too surprisingly, a majority of both black and white teens said yes. But then black teens were asked whether racism was a big problem, a small problem, or no problem at all in their daily lives. It said 89% of black teens said that racism was a small problem or no problem at all in their own daily lives. It said, in fact, more black teens than white teens called failure to take advantage of available opportunities a bigger problem than racism, right? So again, like I said, it's a completely different sentiment now, and a lot of times, you know, again, when you utilize these old polls like this, like I said, it's a different day and time, so it's different sentiments. I don't think there was a large, even though in 1992 you had the Rodney King incident, you were seemingly 5 years removed from that particular incident. And I think that the mindset of black teens and people of that particular time were different. And also, you don't have the advent of didn't have the advent of the internet or social media and stuff like that, because obviously, had there not been someone recording the Rodney King incident, Rodney King would have gotten away, similar to the Ahmaud Arbery situation. So, you just got to take things like that into consideration, right? You know, but like I said, on one of my previous podcasts, missing pieces. We got to put all this stuff together. We just can't put things out. We got to put it all together, right? So, goes on to say welfare is the largest expenditure in the federal budget, more than $1 trillion yearly, with absolutely no empirical points of success that warrant its continued existence. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this, right, is that the money does not go directly from the government to the people. You have middlemen. You have individuals that have occupations that are paid to administer these particular different things like this. And their salaries are by and large included in this particular grand total, which is why a lot of times you hear people say that the money doesn't make it to the individuals that is most set out to help. And to borrow something from Dr. Soul, the rebuttal to people saying that is the fact that, well, there wasn't enough money allocated, or we didn't utilize the right process to get it to the people that it needed to get to. So that's one of those things right there, right? So, and I'm just like I said, I'm just picking out a couple of notes here. So she talked about how she said the current trend of abortions in the black family. Now, that's one of those particular topics I don't necessarily want to indulge in because it's not something that I look at. I've heard about the Margaret Sanger, the Planned Parenthood, things like that, the situation to lower the black population simply because you had imagery seemingly from the Planet of the Apes basically artistically saying if too many black people are around, this is what may end up happening, right? So you got that. But anyway, this is what she put, right? She said Margaret Sanger's ugly history basically has been pardoned by liberals who continue to carry out her agenda. And it says, and with more than 19 million black babies having been aborted since 1973, one black pastor was right to warn that if the current trend of abortions in the black community continues, by 2038, the black vote would be insignificant. It says, according to a Pew Research report, the birth rate for blacks declined 29% between 1990 and 2010. Now, I did a podcast about this, but I did not include abortions or even well, I'll say this. It had to include abortions, but I didn't wholeheartedly say abortions, but I talked about how the Asian population is increasing. The Hispanic population has surpassed the African American population, and then the immigrants that are being allowed to come into this particular country. And based on reports and data, that they more than likely vote Democrat. So what's going to happen eventually is that, yes, the black power structure is going to have to go to Asians and to Latino Americans to talk about issues that are plaguing them. And our issues are going to they're no longer second, they're no longer third. And according to this, by 2038, it doesn't matter what our issues are. You're just gonna have to deal with it because you're gonna be fourth. And one of the things that Dr. Claude Anderson talked about is that African Americans in this country are going to end up being a permanent underclass, and that has come true. So, but it's a mindset thing, right? It's a mindset thing. So, moving on. I'll try to get through this as quickly as I possibly can. So, excuse me. So she had in the situation of education, which I found is interesting because Dr. Soul says something about this as well that I'm going to attach onto this, right? It says, according to a 2018 Status and Trends in Education of Racial and Ethnic Groups, nearly 60% of black students attend schools in which minorities constitute at least 75% of total enrollment. Now, what's interesting about that is Dr. Soul talked about there was a poll taken, and the results were that black children learn better in situations where they're not the majority in the school. They learn better when they're the minority. So basically, black children learn better around white children than they do around black children. So these numbers seemingly support these particular things, right? And these are just numbers, right? But the numbers mean something when you can go out in a real world setting. You can look at some of the trends and statistics and things that are going on out here. You can see how those particular numbers do have some merit to them, and they're not just numbers on paper. So, one of the things that she stated, which I got from, which Elijah Muhammad said this multiple times, but this is how she started off this paragraph, right? It says self-sufficiency is the key to black success, and that's basically one of the things that Elijah Muhammad stood on, was the fact that a black man, the black family in this particular world has to become self-sufficient. You have to be able to feed yourself. You have to be able to clothe yourself. You have to be able to make yourself employable, not just to work, but basically be a contractor and things like that. Be able to fend for yourself, right? So she talked about from 1900 to 1914, the number of black businesses doubled from 20,000 to 40,000. But by 1929, the country had fallen into Great Depression, and blacks especially struggled to break free. But while it is understandable that the black community turned to government assistance in those impossibly lean years, it is confounding that retrospect hasn't taught us any lessons. It says Black America would never become prosperous via welfare and government handouts. If it were possible, it would have already happened. And so that goes back to what I piggybacked about what Dr. Soul said, in the sense that when you say that these particular things do not work, the often rebuttal is, well, we need more money, and we need more time, or we didn't approach this the correct way. And another thing about it is that nobody will spend their money the same way that they're spending your money. A person will spend your money any type of way they want to, but when it comes down to their money, they're going to be a little bit more hesitant to just throw it out there. So that's what that is. So moving on. Another big thing that she talked about in this particular book was the right of education, right? And how a lot of political pundits and things like that, they are not for black parents having the ability to put their children, or have the choice to put their children into such schools such as charter schools, private schools, and and things like that. They've taken that seemingly out of their hands by saying, well, hey, look, put your child in public school, you don't have to worry about it. They're going to be taught, they're going to be, they're going to eat, we're going to teach them everything they need to know, and all those particular things like that. And if the child doesn't make it, then it's no fault of you as a parent. It's seemingly the child's fault, because it's no fault of the teacher either. But one of the things that is interesting about this is that public schools do not have to answer to the teachers. To the parents. They don't. Their obligation is not to make sure that the parent is at the forefront of their child's education, right? They don't answer to the parent at the end of the day. So these are just some of the statistics. She said just 9% of underserved learners who met all three underserved criteria met 3 or more ACT college readiness benchmarks. All right. 21% of underserved ACT tested 2019 high school graduates reported taking 3 years or fewer of math, more than double the percentage of non-underserved graduates, less than 10%, who reported this, right? So it says underserved students lag behind their peers in readiness for STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math coursework, consistent with the previous 2 years. In 2019, only 2% of students who met all three underserved criteria achieved the ACC, ACE, I keep saying ACC, ACT STEM benchmarks. Right, so this is one of the things, right? And I looked at something. Um, and all of this particular stuff is readily available to you. I looked at some of the HBCUs and I looked at a lot of the things because one of the things about HBCUs, they turn out a lot of times the most engineers, the most lawyers, and things like that out of the black community. And the thing about that is there's just a small percentage. It's a small percentage of blacks that major in those fields, but it's a large percentage in the overall entry to the work field that assume these particular positions. But if you look at quite a few HBCUs, what they'll have available for you, just Google, you don't have to go on their website, is they'll show you the percentage. And I talked about this on a previous podcast. They'll show you the percentage of students that are majoring, what they're majoring in. And I just compared it to some, public white, universities. And the percentages were so different. Um, as far as like finance, math, engineering, and stuff like that, those ranked in the lower percentile for HBCUs, whereas they ranked in the higher percentile for public white universities, right? So that's another thing that has to change is that we have to look at these particular things as we have to look at these challenges and we have to figure out ways to um, turn these challenges into things that are no longer challenging instead of kind of looking for an easy way out because by and large all of these particular things go into a lot of this data and a lot of these statistics that are given out to us to make it seem that um, it's systemic when in reality a lot of times it's just a culture issue where in the black community education is not looked upon as something that is needed. It's when it's very very vital. Not just formal education, just education in general. Because I'm not for I'm not by and large with the formal situation. And there's people who go back and forth with all that particular stuff like that. But that's just how I feel about it. So I'm wrapping it up now. In conclusion, so this is to talk about poverty because this is another big talking point as it pertains to Black Americans in this country. It says, take the poverty line for example. It is true that blacks are twice as likely to fall below the poverty line as whites, 20.8% versus 10.1% respectively, according to United States Census Bureau 2018 Income and Poverty in the United States report. But people fail to account for the fact that across all races, single women 24.9% and single men 12.7% are far more likely to live in poverty than married couples 4.7%. It says marriage rates have dropped dramatically in recent years, and as we covered more extensively in Chapter 2, the crisis of unwed mothers has had a dramatic effect on blacks. It says it's worth noting that only 6.9% of black married couples lived in poverty in 2006, while the poverty rate for non-married black families was a staggering 35.3%, a five-fold increase. So, um, so like I said, that was the main thing. This goes back to the black family and how a lot of these particular things that are plaguing us are embedded in that simple thing. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on another podcast. I'm going to talk about like the retrogression and the culture and how the culture has taken on a life of its own in many aspects and certain things that are being promoted um, like that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But In conclusion and wrapping this up, I think this is a it's a it's a good book. I'm not gonna say it's one of the best books I ever read, and there's no slight to Candace by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that I've really read like some really good books, some books that are really insightful about a lot of particular different things. But I feel like that if you want, but getting tongue tied. But I feel like if you want something that will open your eyes from a a different standpoint, then I would feel like this would be a good entry level reader uh, to get into that particular stance. Now, I will say there was she had a chapter on slavery towards the end of the book, and one of the things, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to get out of here. One of the things that I feel like is a tired argument in reference to slavery is okay. We understand slavery did not start with white Europeans. Slavery is still going on to this day. Understand all that particular stuff. Understand that Africans sold other Africans to the to the Europeans that brought African Americans over here on ships. But I don't like the compare and contrast thing, right? We don't have to go and talk about because she talked about like the Aztecs and stuff being cannibals and information and research has shown that they cannibalize people. We don't want to talk about that. If those individuals weren't in a position to talk about what transpired with them, understandably so. But in this particular day and time, we don't need to wholeheartedly just look at that and say, well, look at what happened with that. This was far worse. They didn't get anything out of it. It's not the same thing. We're specifically talking about something that occurred here on this particular soil. We can't talk about what happened with the Aztecs in South America. Can't talk about the Spaniards. Can't talk about the Arab, Arabian slave trade. Can't even talk about the slave trade that's going on to this day. Right? We're only talking about things that are central to this particular continent or this particular continent that we're on right now. So that's the only issue that I have when people bring that particular thing up. But again, that is a review of Candace Owens' Blackout. And like I said, if you want an entry level understanding of some of the things that are bigger issues but are embedded in smaller things, then it's a good book to read. But anyway, that's another episode of Paradigm 132 Podcast. Be back to you again next week. Peace.